Hello and welcome to Better Business Bureau's Smart Consumer. We're here to help you avoid scams, make wise marketplace decisions, and take away information that can help you save money. Now, the word retirement can be overwhelming for some people to think about. It's tough to convince some people, particularly young people, about the need to prepare for retirement. There are also ways we can look at what we've got, what we'd like to do in the future, and how to make those dreams come true. Our guest today, Bill Kosturko, can help us sort this all out. Bill is the lead economic security volunteer at the AARP here in Connecticut, a member of the AARP's Policy Council and the Connecticut Retirement Security Authority. Many titles, but it all boils down to you working with numbers and helping people make sure they're ready by the time they retire. And your latest new title comes from the governor, doesn't it?
That's correct, Howard. In 2016, the General Assembly put into place a law that the governor signed establishing something called the Connecticut Retirement Security Authority. And it's in formation now. Our first meeting is going to take place late in August, and it's the intention of the authority is to help people who presently don't have a pension plan or a 401k plan, help them to save at the workplace. And so it's going to be exciting.
Why would we have a need for that sort of thing?
Well, that is, as they say, more than the $64 question. If I could put it in context, the Boston College Retirement Research Center has estimated that the difference between what Americans have put away for retirement and what they are actually going to need for retirement, that gap is $7 trillion. It was only $6 trillion a year and a half ago as more and more people approach retirement. So we have need for more savings here in the United States. A couple of statistics that might also put this into light. The Federal Reserve has found that families who are approaching retirement, and these are people who are between 59 years old and 65 years old, of that group of families in the United States, the median amount that they have put away for retirement savings on their own is $14,500.
Just peanuts.
So it's peanuts, and so we've got about half of the people in the United States who are approaching retirement who are not financially prepared for supporting themselves during retirement. So the thought behind the Retirement Security Authority is to help with folks who are still in the workplace, who don't have a vehicle for saving at the workplace like a 401k or a pension plan, and to help them put away for retirement as they move through the workplace.
If we take a look at baby boomers, that huge bubble of us that's coming up right now, are we well prepared? Do we not really understand how much money we'll need in the future, or are we doing all right?
Well, I think I'd like to say that we were doing okay, but frankly, the statistics indicate otherwise. Just a couple of things that might help. Back in the 90s, about 60% of the American workforce had a pension or a 401k. Right now, today, that number is down to below 50%. So we've moved in the wrong direction. And the number that I talked to you about people approaching retirement having only $14,000 in savings is an indication that a good portion of the baby boomer generation is looking forward to working longer than they expected, or perhaps not having the lifestyle that they expected when they reach retirement.
But in practical terms, it means they can't retire from work.
That is a very true reality that's facing folks, and which is very difficult. I mean, it's one thing, for example, if you're working in an office and you don't have to tax your body very much, and perhaps it's easier to work from 65 to 70 to beyond 70. But if you're a worker who's doing manual labor and you've been punishing your body with that manual labor as you approach what we consider normal retirement at 65, that's a lot harder to continue doing once you get past the age of 65. So it's an uneven spread of resources that folks have put away for retirement, and there's a lot of us out there who are going to be facing difficulties as they reach retirement age.
There are some calculators that you can find on the internet, people who sell retirement plans, that tells you roughly how much money you will need to retire. Is that a fluid thing that changes according to the economy, or is it pretty accurate?
I think many people put their assets into the marketplace, and as all of us know, that at least the stock market does tend to fluctuate. But if you look at the market over long periods of time, say 20, 30, 40 years, there is a certain amount of stability in terms of how it performs, and it has performed quite well really over the last 85 years. But what is clear, and in Connecticut we had the legislature put together something called the Connecticut Retirement Security Board, which was an 18-month study by 15 individuals. And they found, using outside consultants, that if you can put away at least 3% of your paycheck every pay period, and you do that if you start in your 20s, you are going to be much better prepared for your retirement than if you put away 6% and you start in your 40s. There's this wonderful compound interest effect, or stock market effects. The more you save and in your 20s, you are going to be in a much better position when you get to what is now the retirement age of 65, 66, 67. There's, in terms of the exact percentage of what you should put away in savings, I think most retirement advisors would say if you put away 6 to 8% of your income over your working life, you're probably going to be in a pretty good position once you retire. That's difficult for lots of folks. 6 to 8% means that you're denying yourself a new car, perhaps a better or new house, but in the long run, when you think about educational expenses that people have when they're in their 30s and 40s, maybe paying off their own student loans, once that all happens, if they just start saving for retirement in their 40s or in their 50s, it's really difficult to put away enough for a good retirement.
So it's a situation that any parent will see, and that's the belief, their children have the belief, whether they're students or youngsters, that it's not something I have to worry about now, it's something that happens to other people. They can't retire. I'm going to get out of college or university and I'm all set. And that's just ridiculous, isn't it?
It is. Unfortunately, the mathematics and the economics don't allow that to work, that denial that I'll put it aside for the future. And so the one thing that, getting to that issue, this new retirement authority that Connecticut has set up, what it allows is for people who have a job but don't have an employer that either has a pension plan or a 401k plan. And as you know, pension plans are almost a thing of the past. Only 11% of American workers now have a pension plan at work. What the new retirement authority is going to do is to put into place a plan where people can voluntarily, at their workplace, put aside at least 3% and even more than that per pay period, have it automatically deducted from their paycheck, just like your income tax and state income tax are deducted, and have it go to a private savings account. The state has no involvement in the savings account. It would be run by a vendor like an insurance company or a mutual funds company, and they won't see it. You know, it'll go directly to their account. They won't be able to say, well, maybe tomorrow I'll save, because now this will happen every pay period. It'll go directly into the account, and they'll have the opportunity to have the benefits of a long-term savings for retirement. So that's the challenge for us. There's 600,000 people in Connecticut that don't have a retirement plan at work, either a pension plan or a 401k plan. No way for them to save at the workplace. And the studies have indicated that if you have either a pension plan or a 401k plan at your workplace, you're 15 times more likely to save for retirement. So this plan, which is really just an IRA account, people have known about IRA accounts for a long time, but this is a structure where it's automatically deducted from your paycheck, goes into a private investment account, and will build up so that folks will have more opportunities to have a more comfortable retirement.
What is the difference, for those who don't know, between an IRA and a 401k?
That's a very excellent question. A 401k plan is a plan that an employer enters into, and what that consists of is that the individual employees of that employer can save some portion of their salary and place it in a tax-free account, the 401k account. So if you're 25 years old and you work for an employer that has a 401k account, and you can put up to 5% of your salary into the 401k plan, that 5% that you put in and invest in the marketplace is not taxed to you, and its growth is not taxed as well. So you have this wonderful benefit that the growth of the account is not taxed as you age and as you get toward retirement. Some 401k plans, the employers actually match some portion of what the employee saves. So some will match. For every 5%, I'll match 2.5%. So then all of a sudden this becomes not only tax-free, it becomes free money, because if you're an employee and you can put away that 5%, if your employer is going to match 2.5% on top of that, that's money you wouldn't have had. And so it's a real inducement to save money.
It grows very quickly.
Yeah. Now that's the 401k. Now the IRA account is a little different in that traditionally people have opened their own IRA accounts. They will go to a bank or an investment firm, for example, and they can save up to $5,500 a year, for which they will that amount will not be included in their income for that particular year if it's a traditional IRA, and they'll also enjoy the benefits of this tax-free buildup until they reach actually the age of 70 and a half. And then when they're 70 and a half, the amount that they've saved, they've got to make what they call minimum distributions, and they get taxed at that particular time. So the IRA account is a really nice way to save as well, but it doesn't have the employer match that often a 401k plan has, and it has a $5,500 limit. There's no limit under a 401k plan. So they're both wonderful vehicles that the federal government has established for us.
Those of us who grew up in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, I look back then and I'm thinking it was a lot easier back then in so many ways, but we didn't talk so much about retirement accounts back then. What has changed so drastically?
Well, people used to look at, and still do to a certain extent, look at retirement as a three-legged stool. And the three legs of the stool were your pension, your savings, and Social Security. So those were the three legs of the stool. As I mentioned, the amount of workers in the United States who are covered by a pension plan, which for folks who since there are fewer people with pensions, perhaps I should say, they're known as defined benefit plans, so that when you retire, your employer has put away funds for you, and you will receive a certain specified dollar amount from the time you retire to the time you die. It's an annuity-like payment, and it's a wonderful, dependable source of income. But as I said, fewer and fewer people have the benefit of a pension. So that's one leg of the stool that's a little bit wobbly. Now we've talked about the savings part of the stool, which fewer and fewer people have either a 401k or a pension at the workplace. So savings is somewhat wobbly as well. And then there's Social Security. And I don't think we can really ignore that when you talk about retirement, because Social Security is so important to so many people. Statistically, of the people who are on Social Security, people who start taking it, whether it's at 62 or at 70, those who are on Social Security, half of the people who are on Social Security, the Social Security payment represents more than half of their income each year. So that's how important it is. And for a quarter of the people on Social Security is virtually all the income they have. So you can see that these three legs are really important. We want to make sure that the Social Security system keeps operating, because the other legs are a little bit wobbly. I think that's why, to get back to your question, people didn't think about so much in the 50s and 60s because they had those pensions that they could rely on. And now it's a stark reality saying, my gosh, I've got to save, I've got to invest, I'm going to be responsible for my future, and how am I going to do that?
So we've got to deal with the baby boomers now, and we have a bunch of generations that are coming up that have habits that are totally different than ours, and they see the world differently. Is it going to be a challenge to make them understand? Because the same way as things change between the 60s and now, we can expect it's going to change at least as much between now and the time they're close to retirement.
That's absolutely right. And there's something now called the gig economy, or the 1099 economy, where a lot of folks don't have a formal job, but they will work either as Uber drivers or consultants for a set period of time and then move on. And they especially don't have the benefit of a retirement vehicle, because employers who bring on people in the gig economy don't want to pay them benefits, and that's why saving in some way at the workplace makes sense. And I'm going to go back to this Connecticut Retirement Security Authority. And if you're a part-time worker, if you're over 19, if you're a part-time worker, and your employer has more than 5 employees, that employer has got to allow you to save at the workplace by basically having you voluntarily deduct 3% or more from your gig pay and have it go to this retirement account. The beauty about these new retirement accounts is that they're portable. So if I work for employer A for a year and I move, and employer B doesn't have a 401k or a pension in Connecticut, I can bring my account with me, and all of a sudden employer B will be allowing me to take 3 to 4 to 5% out of my paycheck. So it's a vehicle, it's a process, and I remember when I was in my 20s, I never thought about retirement. It's just something I didn't think about. And I was lucky because I happened to be working for an employer that had a pension plan. And so I was one of those folks, and my generation was one of the generations that didn't have to think about it. And today's younger people, unfortunately, have the burden of thinking about these issues. And it's really tough to look 40 years down the line and say, what am I going to need? And we've got to help folks realize as early as possible in their working careers that saving for retirement is really important.
And that's a challenge, especially with so much credit being available. So this money's available, but we're not necessarily saving. And that's something that's also got to change, isn't it?
I think that's really true. I know that student debt, for example, is now the second largest source of consumer debt behind home mortgages, which is hard to believe when you think about it. Again, I'm not going to put you in my generation because I think you're at least a decade or two behind me, but nonetheless, when I was in college, I did have student debt, but I was able to pay it off within a 10-year period. But now, what is happening is that the cost of higher education has been rising far faster than the wages, and so that folks, either their students themselves or their parents, are taking on more debt obligations to get them through college. And the studies still indicate that going to college is going to give you an economic benefit once you enter the workplace. But I think a lot of young people are still really laboring under the debt that they've incurred to go to college. And if you don't get that paid off till you're 45, it's going to be that much more difficult to save for your own retirement. Tough prospect.
It's also a tough case for parents to make, and for younger folks and students who are listening to this. We have a couple of minutes to go. I wanted to ask you a few things.
Sure.
Is the average person, the average consumer, savvy enough to manage their own retirement accounts, or is it best to go to a broker? I know there can't be any hard and fast rule, but what's the sense that you get out of that?
Well, I think that in the Connecticut Retirement Security Board, we studied that issue, and people who make their own investment decisions in a 401k plan as opposed to the recommendations that are made don't perform as well. It really does help to have an economic advisor of some sort. The problem is that so many advisors charge fees that are very, very expensive. And I'm going to go back to this new Connecticut Retirement Authority where if you are working for an employer and they don't have a 401k or a pension, you can save, and it will be going to an age-appropriate fund that is managed by a professional. And the statute basically has limited the fees that professional can charge. So it's structured so that if you use that vehicle to save, you're not going to get gouged by high fees that some financial advisors charge. I think, to paint with a broad brush, there are just so many good financial advisors out there. If you can find a financial planner who is not going to be compensated by fees from investment products that he or she will sell you, that is a good way to get started in terms of identifying what you need to retire.
In other words, they're not selling a specific instrument for themselves. They could be selling for many different companies.
Exactly. And they have a fiduciary responsibility to you, the consumer, to do the best for you and not the best for themselves. So I think if you can find a planner, a certified financial planner, or someone who is a registered investment advisor, they will guide you and help you make investment decisions that you might not make yourself. The one thing about money, and the one that I found, is it's very emotional. We tend to think of cash as cold and hard, but when it's your money, you get very emotional about it, and it's really hard to say, I'm going to stick with it if the market is going down, or refrain from listening to somebody say, I got a hot tip for you. If you have a kind of a disciplined way of approaching savings and someone to help you do that, I think the studies indicate that you're going to do much better.
I heard that one of the best pieces of advice for people who do have retirement accounts is whether the stock market is doing well or poorly, don't look at it until you're close to retirement.
That is actually quite good advice. I've been talking to a few people who are in the investment advisor investment advisory business, and you remember the Great Recession of 2008. And they are advising people who had money in stocks as well as bonds. And at one point, stocks lost about 40 to 45% of their value across the market. And so if you had money in a retirement account and you lost 40% of your value in the course of what was about an 8-month period, pretty understandable why you'd say, oh my God, I got to get out. But those folks who stayed in have actually done quite well. The folks who really got hurt are the folks who pulled their money out when the market was at its lowest. And so I think most investment advisors will indicate that it's best to let the market do what it's going to do. You probably not going to be able to time the market to get out just before it falls or get in just before it goes up. Let your funds perk along, and in the long run, you'll be better off for it.
And the last part of our conversation, for folks who are balancing debt that's over their head and they're listening tonight and they would, or this afternoon, would like to do something to begin saving, what should they be doing? Who should they be speaking to?
I think that, as I mentioned, a planner, a certified financial planner, will help them look at what are their needs over the next few years. For example, if they're carrying debt, how much will they need to satisfy the debt that they have? Is there a way of refinancing? Is there a way of dealing with that they haven't thought of? And then secondly, they'll also be able to say, well, this is what you're going to need for retirement. How can we plan for you to save the amount that you're going to need to get there? And that third-party advice, especially if it's disinterested third-party advice, really will allow someone to say, okay, these are choices I may not like very much, but this is a way out. This is a way for me to follow a path that hopefully will allow me to pay off my debt, reduce my debt, and increase my savings. Someone there to help removes a lot of the fear and a lot of the mystery out of how to best provide for our families as we get toward retirement age.
It's a daunting task to begin, but the rewards are for a lifetime, hopefully.
And hopefully, that's right.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Well, thank you, Howard.
My pleasure.
The pleasure's mine.
And that's it for this edition of Better Business Bureau's Smart Consumer. I'd like to thank our guest, Bill Kosturko, for taking the time to join us today. Please share what you've learned from our show with members of your family, friends, colleagues, and neighbors, because ultimately education is the ultimate tool to protect ourselves. We'd like to extend our thanks to Nutmeg Television for the opportunity to bring you our show, and I'd like to thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on BBB Smart Consumer. Be sure to join in right here.